I would like to welcome you again, all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the globe. My name is Eran Neumann. I'm the Dean of the Yolanda and David Katz Faculty of the Arts at Tel Aviv University, and I'm glad to open our second series conversations between leading international scholars and intellectual and our faculty members. This is a webinar, so you can see the panelists. Towards the end of the event, we will open the floor for questions, so you can type your question at the Q&A button that you can see on the lower part of your screen. We are honored to have with us today Professor Michio Hayashi of Sophia University in Tokyo, who will converse with Dr. Ayelet Zohar from our Department of Art History on the controversy around the Hayashi Triennale that took place in Nagoya, Japan in 2019. Ironically, it was the exhibition called After Freedom of Expression that was shut down just 3 days after it was opened due to political pressure and threats of violence, serious threat of violence. Ayelet will introduce Professor Hayashi shortly. The title of the series is Art, Protest, and Democracy. In our 4 talks, we will explore the continuous debates about the role played by art, film, theater, architecture, and urbanism in preventing and defending democracy. Over the past few decades, we have witnessed changes in the ways in which democracy is conceptualized and practiced, and seen how this process has led to the worrisome weakening of democracies around the world. Regimes in the Americas, Europe, and Asia have become more deeply nationalist and authoritarian, eroding democratic values and depriving people of their most basic human rights. Faced with the global pandemic, the notion of democracy is being further challenged as leaders worldwide enforce restrictive new rules and regulation under the rubric of state of emergency, which accelerates and institutionalizes these processes. These situations raises numerous questions, including how should artists and researchers respond to the assault on democracy? How does it affect art? What is the place of digital and social media and the arts in sustaining democracies? Should and how can the arts participate in the discussion of democracy today, and will it make any difference? So I'm sure that we will address all these questions in the 4 meetings that's ahead of us, and I truly hope that we will be able to shed some light on these important questions during the series of compelling conversations. Now I'm happy to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Ayelet Zohar, who is a senior lecturer at the Art History Department here at Tel Aviv University. Ayelet's research focuses on Japanese photography and she published extensively on the subject in numerous prestigious journals such as Theory, Cultures and Society, Positions, Asia Critique, Third Text, Japan Focus, and more. Ayelet was the curator of Beyond Hiroshima, a return of the repressed, an excellent exhibition that was on display at the Genia Schreiber Tel Aviv University Art Gallery in 2019, where she exhibited Japanese photography and video art that engaged with war memory in contemporary Japan. She's just completed editing a special issue on contemporary photography in Japan for the Review of Japanese Culture and Society with Josai University in Tokyo, in which Professor Hayashi was contributed an interesting entry discussing Pierre Hughes' Human Mask, a video work that was made in Fukushima after the 2011 triple disaster. Zohar's forthcoming book is titled Performative Recollection, War Memory in Contemporary Japanese Video Art, which is currently in the making. Thank you, Professor Hayashi, and thank you, Ayelet.
Thank you very much, Eran, Professor Neumann, for introducing so kindly my work. I just wanted to correct that the exhibition at the Genia Schreiber Tel Aviv University Art Gallery was in 2015, not 19. And it was celebrating, yes, 70 years to the end of the war. And it is my huge pleasure to introduce my colleague and the distinguished scholar of contemporary Japanese art, Professor Michio Hayashi, who is a professor at Sophia University, the Faculty of Liberal Arts. Professor Hayashi gained his PhD from Columbia University, and his current position at Sophia University since 2003. His publications include Quiet Dislocations, Quiet Dislocations, Shizukani Kuru Manazashi, which was published in Tokyo by Suseisha in 2017. Painting Dies Twice or Never, Kaiga wa Nido Shinu, Arui wa Shinanai, volume 1 to 7, published by Art Trace between 2003 to 2009, again in Tokyo. And a book on Natsuyuki Nakanishi, published by the Pergus McCaffrey Gallery in New York in 2014. And Remaining the Tragedy, Lessons from Post-March 11 Japan, in an extensive book and exhibition curated by the Boston Fine Art Museum called In the Wake, Japanese Photographers Respond to March 11. And Tracing the Graphic in Post-War Japanese Art is another article by Professor Hayashi, published in a book titled Tokyo, 1955 to 1970, A New Avant-Garde. And this was an exhibition at MoMA in New York, which Professor Hayashi took part in its writing. And he co-edited the very important and massive volume on Japanese post-war art criticism, From Post-War to Postmodern, that's the title of the book, Art in Japan, 1945 to 1989. So without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Hayashi to give his talk. He will present the scandal and the events surrounding the Aichi Triennale of 2019. And then I will start a conversation with Professor Hayashi concerning different questions that being raised by these events. And we'll open to the floor to get some questions, which you can type into the chat, and we will follow them to pose at the very end of this event today. So thank you very much, Michio, for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ayelet. Let me share my PowerPoint first to see whether it works or not. Are you seeing it on your screen? Good, good, good. Okay.
Well, yes, we do. It's all clear.
Good. So let me begin. Thank you very much again for a kind introduction, Ayelet. And thanks also for inviting me to this wonderful event. The last time I visited Tel Aviv was in December 2018, when Ayelet and her colleagues organized a huge 3-day conference on the history of modern Japan. At the time, I gave a keynote speech on the historical transformation of katakana alphabet in Japanese language. So this is my second collaboration with your university. But as you all know, the format of participation is totally different because of the ongoing COVID-19 situation. So it is unfortunate that I cannot see you in person to engage with a face-to-face discussion. But on the other hand, the online session like this made it possible for participants across the globe to get together to exchange ideas, while the formation of scholarly community became much more fluid and open. That means that new intellectual resonances can be found or established day by day among unpredictable places across the borders of many kinds. I hope that this small talk of mine will contribute to that trend and resonate with ideas and problems that you have in your mind. The Aichi Triennale 2019 incident has a very complex structure and induced so many spin-off events. Let me proceed. Or reactions from a wide range of positions. I mean, this is just a rough timeline, and you don't have to really pay attention to the details here. So it opened in August 1st and lasted until October 14th, and there are some important events happened in between. Okay? So I have to admit that to trace the whole fiasco in 45 minutes is impossible. So what I will do is to choose some topics from my personal experience of the incident and try to expand the scope to talk about larger contextual issues that may resonate with similar issues in and outside Japan. But before going into those specific topics, perhaps a rough summary of basic facts is in order. Aichi Triennale was scheduled to open on August 1st and close on October 14th in 2019. It consisted of sections of art exhibition, music program, performing arts, film program, and various learning events. Their homepage is still alive on the internet for you to explore. The history of Aichi Triennale goes back to 2010, and the 2019 version was the fourth. Every time they use a network of different venues in the Aichi prefecture in Japan, but the two museums in the city of Nagoya always remain as the central venues. They also invite different artistic director each time. This time it was Tsuda Daisuke, a journalist who has been vocal in various contemporary issues, including cultural trends. Under his direction, 8 curators formed a curatorial team and invited about 200 artists, musicians, performers from all over the world. The After Freedom of Expression section that we are going to discuss today was therefore a small part of this large-scale exhibition, and it is unfortunate that the rest of the Triennale exhibition was somehow overshadowed by the whole turmoil about the After Freedom of Expression section, and did not get a proper media attention they deserved. The slide you're seeing is a map of one floor of the Aichi Arts Center, where the After Freedom of Expression section was located. 823 was the location. At the center of this slide, you see the image of the closed door of that section taken in mid-August when I first visited the Triennale as a visitor. The image on the right is a close-up of the sign in front of the door announcing the closure of that section. Unlike the rest of the Triennale sections, this section was now proposed by one of the curators, but directly chosen by Tsuda himself, who was impressed by the original version of this group exhibit, which was presented in a gallery in Tokyo in 2015. About the concept of the section, the Triennale homepage says the following. This may seem like a little exhibition inside an exhibition. For one reason or another, due to censorship or self-censorship, most works presented here were not exhibited in the past in Japan. It may seem odd that this short explanatory paragraph does not mention any artist names. This is due to the fact that Tsuda invited this mini exhibition as a package represented by the curators. In other words, the curators are treated as one of the invited artists, and they were the ones who signed the contract with the Triennale. This unusual contractual structure later made the negotiation process so complicated when stakeholders began to negotiate with one another toward the reopening of the section. In any case, this section included about 15 artists, including Chimpom, Kim Yum-soon and Kim So-kyun, Koizumi Meiro, Nakagaki Katsuhisa, Oura Nobuyuki, Shimada Yoshiko, Shirakawa Yoshio. Their works were censored or severely criticized or unwillingly transformed for various reasons at different occasions before 2019. To exhibit together those works in one place within the international event was an ambitious plan that was meant to be provocative from the beginning. So Tsuda and the Triennale office was already expecting loud protest, especially from right-wing activists before the opening. But the truth is that when the Triennale opened, the massive attack against the after freedom of expression section, mainly through telephone calls, emails, and faxes, happened at a pace and scale that surpassed their expectation and quickly paralyzed the whole administrative function, not only of the Triennale, but also of the prefectural government. What you're seeing is, sorry, it's in Japanese, but the number of telephone calls indicated in blues and the emails indicated in browns. This is only for 1 month from October 1st to October 31st. But many of them, most of them, are concentrated on the first couple of days or week of the opening of the Aichi Triennale. More than 1,500 phone calls were made to Triennale committee, and more than 1,200 calls were made to the call center of the prefectural government, and more than 1,000 phone calls were received by other sections of the prefectural government, etc., etc. Okay. So in addition, some of those phone calls, telephone protests, were quite long and abusive to the receivers, often employing the language of curse and insult, and psychologically damaged receivers on the other end. The receivers, either public servants or hired part-timers, were obligated to take all the calls, and moreover, not allowed to hang up because they were supposed to provide public service. In other words, they were suddenly put into a situation in which they had to endure the endless verbal abuse from those protesters from morning to night. It is not difficult to imagine that many of them soon began to show some symptoms of mental stress and exhaustion. Among the works exhibited in the section, 2 were attacked most severely in those protest calls. One is the Statue of Peace by Kim Yun-sun and Kim Seo-kyun, and the video piece called Holding Perspective Part 2 by Oura Nobuyuki. The former is, of course, about the statue made in commemoration of the so-called comfort women who were exploited, abused, and violated by the Japanese military during the Second World War. And the latter is a video piece about the war memory. Let me show you. War memory and the complex function that the image of Hirohito played in it. So I don't want to go into the discussion of the possible meanings of these works today. That will require another 2-hour session. For the purpose of this session, it suffices to say that both of these works are open for multiple interpretations and quite subtle in their historical implications. For example, the Statue of Peace has an empty chair as its integral part, and the viewer is invited to sit beside a girl, and there is a shadow cast at the back of her, which looks like a cast of an older woman. If you would like to discuss this statue in its entirety, you have to see and experience this piece in person and in detail. Oura's piece is a 20-some minute video piece that features a female character from the contemporary society that complicates the temporality of the narrative. The opening and the last scenes of the video, in which one sees the burning of an image of Hirohito, is part of this narrative. Besides, what is burnt is not really an independent portrait of him. It is part of the artist's earlier work in which the image of Hirohito was used as one element among others. Therefore, this last scene is quite nuanced with multiple connotations that should be taken into account when you try to interpret this work. The problem, well, in fact, there is a link to the this Oura's piece, video piece. You see, started with this burning of yes, Hirohito's image. It ends with it too. You can see at the end. Okay. The problem is that the Massive attack on these two pieces, as well as against other works in the section, was instigated by the spread of maliciously distorted or adversely simplified information about them through social media. This is the first point I would like to present you with for the later discussion. That is, most of the protesters who started calling or sending emails have not seen the actual pieces. In fact, those protests started flooding in already on July 31st, which is the day of the preview of the Triennale. And 3 days later, the governor Omura of Aichi Prefecture, who was the head of the organizing committee, and director Tsuda decided to shut down the section due to the possibility of harm on visitors as well as staff. The fact that they received a fax threatening to put fire on the exhibition site on August 3rd was also another decisive factor for their decision. Oops, sorry. These are the exhibition site. You see other works included in section 2. Sorry. So this is the sort of explanation of what happened in the first 3 days of the Aichi Triennale. July 31st is already a preview evening, and telephone attacks started already. And August 2nd, they received an anonymous fax threatens to visit the museum with gasoline can. This was reported to police, of course. But disturbing thing is that the politicians, like the chief cabinet secretary, already suggested to review the, the subsidy that they once promised to the Aichi Triennale already August 1st. And then Mayor Kawamura of Nagoya visited the museum and told in press conference that exhibition trampled on the heart of the Japanese people, and et cetera, et cetera. And those actions by the politicians really fueled the protest further. And I can come back to, I will actually come back to these details soon. So let me actually go to another slide here. So the following, this is a quote from the artist's statement issued on August 12th in response to the closure of the section, and explains succinctly what was happening in the first days of the Triennale. Quote, "It is a fact that the exhibition received hundreds of intimidating phone calls after the opening of the Triennale, as well as a fax warning of an attack on the venue using gasoline and fire, recalling the July 18th arson attack on an animation studio in Kyoto that has claimed at least 35 lives to date." This was only 2 weeks before the opening of the Aichi Triennale, by the way. "We are alarmed by the possibility of any harm coming to the people watching over our works during the exhibition period, and will do everything in our power to resist such terroristic threats and intimidation. We believe that all precautions must be taken to ensure the mental and physical safety of the exhibition staff and visitors," end quote. So whether the decision made by the governor Omura and the artistic director Tsuda to close the exhibition on August 3rd was a censorship or a necessary emergency measure to avoid any harm to the staff and visitors remains as an open question. There might have been some procedural problems during the intense 3-day negotiation among the governor, the director, and the curators of the After Freedom of Expression section. The testimonies differ in some accounts, but the bottom line is that the closure of the section is not a simple case of typical censorship in which a government or police or public agency of that sort intervened to shut down the exhibition for political or ideological reasons. In that regard, what is interesting is the two opposing attitudes that the governor Omura and the mayor of Nagoya City, Kawamura, demonstrated in response to the After Freedom of Expression section. The latter, the Kawamura, in response to the growing protest against the works in the section, this is, Governor Omura and Mayor Kawamura. Yeah. So the Kawamura, in response to the growing protest against the works in the section, visited the venue to see them and publicly said that the exhibition tramples on the heart of the Japanese and should not be held using tax money. There is no doubt that this comment by Kawamura fueled ultra-nationalist attack against the Triennale and as such should be condemned as a clear violation of the freedom of expression that is protected by Article 21 of our Constitution. Besides, Kawamura was a member of the organizing committee of the Triennale, was in principle obliged to stay neutral toward the political or ideological views expressed by artworks shown in the Triennale. This is a stance that the Governor Omura took toward the works in that section. In the public press conference, he criticized Kawamura harshly for stepping outside the expected code of behavior and refrained from making any comments about the works themselves. Trained as a lawyer, Omura knew the importance of the concept of freedom of expression written clearly in our Constitution and understood that it is improper for a politician organizer to make judgment about the meaning of or quality of each word. I'm getting a message in the chat. Should I open it? Somehow can't. Oops, sorry. Somehow I can't open that.
Don't worry about the chat. We take care of that.
Okay, good. So in other words, the decision to close the section was not an active censorship on the part of Omura. Yes, it was clearly an intervention, but it was a bitter decision to prioritize the security of people over the freedom of expression of the involved artist. That is why he continued to make efforts throughout the running period of Triennale to prepare the conditions to reopen the after the freedom of expression section. But it is also undeniable that it leaves us with a difficult problem to deal with. This is the second point that I would like to emphasize as a continuing lesson from the Aichi Triennale, that is, how we strike the balance between the public safety and freedom. Curiously, this resonates with the present situation of COVID-19 too, in which every government is trying to put some pressures on people's freedom of movement or activities in relation to the security of the nation or public safety of the nation. To what extent or in what kind of situations are we entitled to or obliged to sacrifice the freedom of expression in favor of public safety? In fact, a scholar of Japanese Constitution, Sota Kimura, said in one of the events concerning the after freedom of expression section that whether the closure of the section can be seen as a case of censorship or not depends on how imminent the possibility of harm was at the time of the closure. Another constitution scholar, Satoshi Yokodaido, in the international symposium held in early October in response to the event or incident, also told us that the closure of the section cannot be interpreted as a case of censorship, at least in the strict legal sense. Be that as it may, we also have to consider wider implications of this security-freedom relationship, for security or public safety can easily be used as a powerful excuse to suppress freedom. It is a convenient rhetorical tool to justify any form of censorship or control of artistic expression. In that regard, it is notable that Latin American artists, such as Tania Bruguera, took an aggressive stance against the closure of the after freedom of expression section. This was perhaps because artists like her have experienced numerous cases of censorship in the name of public safety. But not only in Latin American countries, but also in recent Hong Kong, for example, we saw people's right to express freely was severely oppressed by invoking the fictive image of public safety for local community. To move on to what happened between the closure of the after freedom of expression section and the reopening of it on October 8th, so many things happened during the closure time, one after another. Two Korean artists, Lim Minuk and Park Chang-kyun, decided to close their sections in solidarity with the artist in the after freedom of expression section on August 3rd. And then on August 20th, 9 additional artists, including Tanya Bruguera, joined the boycott. Later, Koki Tanaka, the Japanese artist, changed his exhibition in relation to the incident. And later, Hikaru Fuji, another Japanese artist, also decided to close his section to pressure the committee to speed up the process of reopening, etc., etc. Some artists, such as Yui Usui and Nodoka Odawara, both Japanese, issued statements individually, while curators and the artists of the After Freedom of Expression section continuously negotiated to reopen the section. There was a movement from the organizers' side too. The Governor Omura organized a third-party review committee consisting of various specialists in art-related fields to review what happened during the first days of the Triennale and prepare the ground for reopening the After Freedom of Expression section. I have some thoughts about these things too, but given the limited time frame, I would like to concentrate my attention today on the role that the artist collective called Refreedom Aichi played during the closure period. Refreedom Aichi was established as a loosely connected artist collective in response to the crisis of the Aichi Triennale. Its primary goal was to reopen the closed section of the After Freedom of Expression section. The idea of it emerged as a plan out of the several meetings held among artists during the first weeks after the closure. As you can see in the slide, about 40 artists from the Aichi Triennale signed to endorse their activities. The names highlighted yellow are the ones who were most active in their activities. Among them, Chimpon, Koizumi, Ohashi, Shirakawa, Mannequin Flash Mob were the artists included in the After Freedom of Expression section. Artists highlighted blue are the ones who shut down their exhibit in support of the closed section. Pedro Reyes is one of the curators who supported the boycott. They quickly established their homepage. Okay, Refreedom Aichi. Are you seeing the website? You're not. Are you seeing the website in your screen?
Michio, if you want us to see a website, you have to shut the share and choose the new window for the share of the website.
Okay, all right. Let me...
So you go to the share screen, you stop sharing, then you select the new window that you want to share.
Here we go.
Okay.
Are you seeing the website now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so Refreedom Aichi established the homepage and announced the agenda, and in Japanese and Korean here, and in English here. If you go, then as you can see, I mean, they have they set up the agenda when they announced the establishment of this artist collective. You see the negotiations, security, audience, and archive and funding, etc., and which ends with the protocol. Okay. So as you can see here, the move was very quick. Let me actually go back to my PowerPoint here, sorry. Confusion. Here we go. And as soon as they began crowdfunding on the internet, which is stated in number 4 of that agenda, incredible amount of support came from all over the world. And using this fund, they were able to start various projects at multiple fronts. What was notable is that these activities were not controlled by any center. Participating artists proposed projects using their own skills and knowledge to contribute to the overall goal. For example, if you look at number 1, oops, sorry. Okay. Sorry, I created this slide just before that. But just to give you a rough picture of what the position of each stakeholder was. And there's a Triennale organizing committee, which is consists of Governor Omura and artistic director Tsuda, And Nagoya, the mayor of Nagoya Kawamura is also a member of the organizing committee, but they actually oppose each other. And Kawamura publicly condemned, criticized the freedom, after freedom of expression. So it should be after should be inserted here, after freedom of expression section. And so these red lines are the criticisms, attacks. So right-wing protesters attacked, various different sections, including prefectural offices, sponsors, and schools in the local area. Some of the elementary schools or schools in the area received some threatening phone calls from some protesters too. And so the after freedom of expression section was, closed by the decision of Omura and Tsuda, and of course, and they protested against them. So the intense negotiation started between the two, but it was like a stalemate, and it was really not moving rapidly. So the freedom of Aichi was established during this turmoil, and then they are the ones who started talking to, maintain a communication with various different groups, and then try to set up a middle ground, and then set up a condition for the reopening of the after freedom of expression section. And also, like I said, the organizing committee, Omura, also established a review committee to review what happened in the first days of the Triennale. And this review committee consisted of some specialists from third-party specialists from the art-related fields. Okay, so this is the general structure. I can come back to this later again. If you look at the number one, Akira Takayama, a playwright and theater director, established a J-Art call center where artists themselves take calls from protesters. Many artists actually volunteered to take calls from the protesters, as you can see in this slide. Since Takayama has always been interested in deconstructing the boundary between theater and everyday life, this project was also conceived as a theatrical experiment, but also at the same time to share the burden of receiving, the burden of people who are receiving those intimidating calls, walking up the various offices. At the bottom center, you see Yoshio Shirakawa, who was one of the artists in the After Freedom of Expression section, talking to a protester. He told me that sometimes the call lasted for hours. And it was not only men, but also women protesters who quite aggressively scolded him for not knowing the history or something. But when she finally found out that Shirakawa is older than herself, he is now in the 70s, she suddenly changed her attitude and got quite confused because the protester, I guess the artist is very young and did not know the history of World War II and et cetera, in Japan. But Shirakawa turned out to be older than she is. In any case, he told me that he did not really engage in a debate with them and mostly listened to what they had to say, but it was overall a very interesting experience for him. You also see the mayor of Koizumi volunteered to receive calls, so did Nabuchi of the group Kyunchome. Okay. And speaking of the Your Freedom Project, or Our Freedom Project, which is mentioned in number 2, it was the artist group Kyunchome who organized it in collaboration with Monica Meyer, whose clothespin project was appropriated for the purpose of collecting public opinions about the closure of the After Freedom of Expression section. This is Monica Meyer's exhibit, which is in the Art Center. But after the closure of that section, Monica decided to boycott the exhibit. And so they dispersed all these post-it memos on the floor, and then this whole section remained as you see it now. So the Kyunchome, they asked Monica Meyer for the permission to use the same kind of format to do this project, Your Freedom Project. And they provided post-its in front of the closed door to the after freedom of expression section and asked visitors to leave message. And they posted those messages on the door during the closure period. The number of those messages accumulated toward the reopening of the section. The image on the right was taken, the image on the center is taken on September 17th, about 3 weeks before the reopening. Naturally, the post-its gradually spilled over the frame of the door to fill up the adjacent walls. It was an effective way to visualize the anonymous voices of hundreds of visitors who resented the loss of the opportunity to experience the artworks behind the door with their own eyes. And establishment of sanatorium, an ad hoc community space for dialogues and lectures by two artists, Bontaro Dokuyama and Tsubasa Kato, predates the public announcement of the ReFreedom Aichi project. But it quickly became a central forum for diverse people who wanted to voice their opinions or listen to specialist opinions about the ongoing event. They did a series of lectures, for example. Well, first of all, they quickly found this a space which used to be a tonkatsu restaurant in Nagoya City, which is vacated because they ran out of business. They quickly found this place and rented that space. And they did a series of lectures, for example, about the concept of the freedom of expression and its history in Japan by inviting scholars, lawyers, and activists. They kept their door open to anybody, including nationalists, to sustain dialogues among people with different perspectives. They used the space also for the discussion toward the making of what they called Aichi protocol to clarify multiple issues in contemporary Japanese art world. The drafting of the Aichi Declaration or Protocol was another project that ReFreedom Aichi engaged with from an early stage of the closure period. The final version of it is now available on the Aichi Triennale homepage. As is explained there, three artists, Fuji Hikaru, Murayama Goro, Odawara Nodoka. Odawara was not a member of the ReFreedom Aichi, but she participated as an individual independent artist in this project of writing up the protocol. They played a central role in drafting it. They held many meetings with a wide range of specialists and legal counselors, and sometimes with an anonymous audience, to revise the document toward the final version, and eventually presented it to the governor Omura at the end of the Aichi Triennale. This document remains on the Triennale's homepage for as long as possible, so that artists as well as curators or directors can refer back to it to clarify their duties and responsibilities. Let me actually open again, the website and show it to you. This is the Aichi Triennale's homepage, still remaining there. You see the Aichi Declaration and Protocol is now uploaded there. And yes, maybe I should zoom up. So it starts with a preamble and Aichi Declaration and goes into the actual protocol, and it addresses the question of philosophical sort of conceptual background of the freedom of art, and they write up the rights and duties of the artist, rights of artists, duties of artists, the rights and duties of artistic directors and curators, the rights of duties of organizers, the function of art museums at art festival venues, the duties of local governments, and conclusion. So this whole document is is a collective effort, and then professional lawyers were also involved, and I was involved in the process of drafting this numerous times. Actually, I participated in their meetings too. So it is actually available on the internet. If you are interested, you should probably visit Aichi Triennale 2019 site and read it carefully, which is a very interesting document. So I just listed the main sort of chapter outlines of the protocol here. Yes, this document remains on the homepage, yes. And although this document does not have any legal authority toward any future art exhibitions or events, this will remain as an important guiding post for them. Okay. So while engaging with these different projects running in parallel, they also maintain contact with both organizers, review committee, the curators of the freedom of expression section, or artists who boycotted or changed their exhibits in response to the crisis, and worked very hard to prepare the ground on which the reopening of the section becomes possible. As I was involved in the activities to a degree, especially in the process of drafting the Aichi protocol, I witnessed partially their efforts to create a middle ground in which organizers and the curators of the After Freedom of Expression can continue to talk to each other to make the reopening of the closed section possible. I am not saying that the activities of ReFreedom Aichi was the only factor to make the reopening possible. So many different factors and players contributed to it. But it is my impression that they played a key role in creating the collective drive toward the reopening, and by making their activities visible and inclusive, contributed much to keep public attention and engagement alive during the closure period. Since they themselves are not rigidly unified in terms of political ideology and had respectively different or sometimes conflicting approaches and methods to address the ongoing issue, they were able to create multiple fronts of connectivities across multiple borders. In that sense, although sometimes I had some momentous doubts and could not necessarily agree with their decision at times, overall, I was constantly amazed by the creative and flexible strategies to keep the space of negotiation alive and meaningful. Speaking of the aftermath of the Aichi Triennale, toward the end of the exhibit, on September 26th, the Agency of Cultural Affairs of Japanese government announced that they will not deliver the once promised subsidy to the Triennale, which is 78 million yen, that equaled 10% of the whole budget. This created another outrage from the public, and ReFreedom Aichi established a website to collect petitions to protest against this decision, and they were able to gather more than 100,000 petitions from the general public, and brought those petitions directly, oops. Oh, again, I had this. Yes, this is the reopening of the freedom of expression, which is October 8th. This reopening happened with some conditions, with necessary security measures and limited the number of visitors. So they used the lottery system, and these people waiting for the lottery result in front of the entrance of the venue. And ReFreedom Aichi people brought those petitions directly to the Agency of Cultural Affairs on November 8th, but the way the agency tried to handle this petition seemed not appropriate for the weight of the number of petitioners. The director of the agency never showed up, and since the artists were not certain whether the petitions were going to be properly handled in the agency, they came out without handing the petitions to them. The whole negotiation was, in fact, broadcast to the street as if it is a real theater. This is another idea by Takayama. And so these are the picture. These are the people lining up before entering into the Agency of Cultural Affairs building on November 8th. So, and this is the press conference after this event that these ReFreedom of Aichi people did. So I am going to conclude with my talk soon, but before that, I would like to point out several issues that I see as very important, but not necessarily have any clear answer to. The first is the relationship between the public safety and freedom that I briefly mentioned, in my talk. Obviously, there's no clear answer to it. I mean, this decision has to change case by case. But is it possible to have a clear guideline, something for reasonable compromise between the two problems? Okay. The second question I have is the ecological shift of the media formation and the politics of credibility. And so the interrelationship between media has changed completely from the traditional pyramidal order, that is to say, it used to be that TVs and newspapers are on top in terms of the hierarchy of the credibility, but that kind of structure is now gone, and the media relationship is more fluid and disorderly. So, in other words, the traditional infrastructure of credibility is lost, right? And they're replaced by an unstable dynamism or chaos of intermediate relationships. So credibility becomes an object of interactive language game, as it were. Is it possible in such environment to establish a system, perhaps a network of professionals to play the role of the informational referees or something? And the third question that I have, which is also directly related to Japan and also other countries too, the problem of populism and its rhetoric. So what was most shocking to myself during this whole event was that several newspaper companies or media companies did a survey of general public's opinion about the closure of the after freedom of expression section, and it turned out that in some cases, more than 40% of the people, general public, approved the closure of the after freedom of expression section. And then Mayor Kawamura said, as I said earlier, that this whole the exhibition of the Statue of Peace and also Oura's video piece was like trampling on the heart of Japanese people. So it is a typical populist rhetoric to use the word Nihonjin, like Japanese people or nationals, as if it is a unified people. The idea of multiplicity has no place in this kind of rhetoric. And this is a rhetoric of antagonism, we versus them, and leads to the ideology of xenophobia, of course. And this is, in fact, as many scholars already noted, may be a result of the unconscious defense mechanism against the economical trend of globalization that allures people to hang on to the imaginary frame of nationhood as the fixed object of desire. In that regard, it is interesting to look back at Benedict Anderson's concept of imagined community. Back in the 1980s, when he published the book, it was received as a deconstructive critique of the nationhood, which people naively believed to be natural and therefore real, right? By pointing out the fact that the nation state is a historical construct, Anderson seemed to be pointing to the possibility of imagining the world in which the presence of nation states is not an absolute given. But what is happening now seems to be suggesting that people are clinging to, or even more strengthening, the concept of nationhood, despite the fact that they know it is a fictional construct. It is an imaginary object, but absolutized as if it is a fetish to support one's imaginary identity. It does not matter whether this object is imaginary of historical construct. It is supported because it performs the task of securing one's identity. So imagined community argument no longer is, in a way, effective in deconstructing the performative function of this imaginary entity. So the fourth and last point that I want to make here is the education and the politics of temporality. And it is becoming more and more difficult to imagine what is good for the society in longer terms. short-term results or returns are the only concern that occupy people's mind. This short-sighted vision of time is also applied back to the past. Historical past and accurate knowledge of it are becoming irrelevant for their political imagination, the current political imagination. The past is quite arbitrarily written and rewritten to strengthen the narcissism of the present. So how we resist such revisionist desires prevalent everywhere? We perhaps need to unravel the temporality of the short-term present into multiple layers of temporalities and demonstrate that to fixation on the present may lead us to further uncertainty, not only of our cultural identity, but also of the political system called democracy. Okay, so that is the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hayashi. That was a super interesting. Actually, on your last section, I could easily replace the word Japan with the word Israel or the Jewish state and come with the very same end result, because the strong imaginary community that exists in this country and the self-estimation and kind of exclusion from the entire environment or region is very evident. So I think in this respect, Japan and Israel share something very common in the understanding of isolated nation with a certain history and the way these histories function in the broader section. So thank you very much for these comments and the way you brought up your thoughts and your interpretation of the rolling events in the Aichi Triennale in 2019. At this point, I would like to pose several questions, several ideas that probably will help us to further discuss the Aichi Triennale in the political landscape of Japan versus or vis-a-vis the art world and the way the art world is negotiating and corresponding with the political atmosphere. So just one probably historical aspect is if you could probably point out several important elements talking about the relationship between politics and the arts, or politicians getting involved in the art world. Like we saw it very brutally, very sharply being exposed in Aichi 2019. And actually there was a big debate between the mayor and the governor about, you know, what should be done, how to handle the questions posed by freedom of expression. But what are the references that you can mention that highlight this question, or what would be a reference to Kawamura's step in a broader sense of the Japanese landscape of politics and the arts?
Yes, I mean, Kawamura has always been known as very historical revisionist who has been consistently denying the fact that Japanese military had a comfort woman and et cetera, et cetera. And he was really vocal about it for a long time, and he is still. And so in that sense, I mean, there are a certain number of people in groups in Japan who are always very vocal about it since the 1980s, when this comfort man issue became a huge political and public issue. But in terms of the politicians' direct intervention into art exhibitions or art expressions, it's very rare, I think, to find examples like Kawamura's, I think. And so I think it has to do with the general climate of the political landscape in Japan in the past maybe 10 or so years, especially when Abe became the prime minister for the first time. I think 2012, I think, was when he became a prime minister. His catchphrase was "Nihon wo torimodosu," like to regain Japan or something like that. It's not
make Japan great again.
Exactly, and so. In the past 10 years is a constant sort of shift toward right. If left and right dichotomy is still an effective, discursive tool. And I mean, that remains a question. I mean, to me, it seems like the left political, power or forces really disappeared quickly after the 1980s. And then, so they no longer have the enough number of, supporters to be politically effective in the public discourse. So that I think the center of the collective Japanese politics is as an entirety moving gradually to the right. So what is, in that sense, what is more disturbing is the general cultural climate in Japan rather than the individual politicians to me. I just mentioned the result of the survey of general public against about this closure of the after freedom of expression section, and many of them are in favor of the closure. And I think that has to do with the lack of understanding about the criticality of art, in general art education here in Japan. And art is, for a majority of the public, it's still something beautiful and comfortable and should be distanced from social or political concerns. And art is simply for the aesthetic pleasure of the eye, not for critical reflection. And I think that kind of, view about art, which, could function very well as a critical tool against society. I mean, that view is not taught anywhere in Japan, especially in the educations of, middle school, high school, or even in colleges. Even in art universities here, they don't have many theoretical courses. I mean, they emphasize the practicality of the teachings and whatnot. So the theory part and social, reflections and gender issues and all the things are actually left, as the last thing that they do. So that needs to change. And then I think the only way to change it is the long-term educational reform here in Japan, which I think I am not really optimistic about it, but I mean, that needs to happen, I think, in Japan. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I would like to take it further. I noticed that Koizumi Meiro was the star of your show in each and every slide nearly. He was at the center of the images. And the role of Koizumi, by the way, he was in Tel Aviv also in 2015. I invited him during the Beyond Hiroshima, the Return of the Repressed exhibition, because his work was very central in my exhibition. And so I mentioned his name because Koizumi, for those who are not associating the name with the works, is an artist who worked for long term on the image of the kamikaze pilot as a protagonist, as a question mark of the conduct of Japanese society during the war, questioning the normativity and the association of this image to war memory. And war memory seems to be a very central issue in this question of freedom of expression, because it seems like whenever anything to do with war memory, especially the sensitive subjects that include the comfort women, the Battle of Okinawa, probably Unit 731 in China, etc., the massacre of Nanjing, etc. So when these tender points come up, then the whole thing comes to a hold. And I wanted to ask you in a more broader way, what do you think, how Japanese society, probably the education system that you mentioned a few moments ago, and as part of the education and cultural system, the art world, how is war memory functioning today in these systems? And what is the role of war memory in the broader political debates in Japan?
Wow, that's a big question.
Try to narrow it to any aspect that you think is most relevant. Yes.
I mean, well, given the fact that you started the discussion with Koizumi, I think in the art world, I think it is in a way, an interesting phenomena that we begin to see artists like Koizumi or Fuji Hikaru, who also is very much interested in war memories. And then there are several artists who, are constantly addressing this issue of war memories now, I think, which is a new trend in comparison to, say, in the 80s or 90s. So I think it has to do with multiple factors. I think one of the factors is, of course, generally speaking, this, the spread of the post-colonial theories or post-colonial discourse in all over the world. I think Japanese artists like Koizumi and Fuji or Tanaka, Koki Tanaka, and all those. I mean, there's younger generations of artists who are active in and outside Japan, and they all have experiences in living abroad and then learning, studying in different countries, and came back. And they are much more flexible in terms of crossing the boundaries. And then they were very much aware of what is going on in the contemporary art world, especially, the social issues, the post-colonial issues and gender issues and whatnot. And I think that sort of general trend was a big stimulation for their works. But also the internal factor in Japan, I think, one of the factors I think has to do with 3/11. The March 11, 2011, we had this Fukushima incident, the tsunami and all those things. And after 3/11, I don't know how many books came out about the Okinawa and Fukushima. Usually the Okinawa and Fukushima began to be discussed together as a pair because they reflect the hidden memories of the Cold War, right? The Okinawa is the American base issue, and nuclear power plant was introduced to Japan during the occupation period. It's General Electric was the first, the company who built nuclear plants in Japan. So Japan and America relationship, that's a political relationship, really contributed much to change Japan to a nuclear nation. And then discourse our company did was that, nuclear is the cleanest energy, and we can use nuclear power peacefully. It's the peace energy for the future, and all those very beautified sugar-coated rhetorics actually were prevalent in the I think early 1950s on. And in 1970, the actual plant was built. And then after 3/11, people really became conscious about these hidden history, not hidden, but it was always there, but people were blind to it in a way. People began to see what really happened during the Cold War period and the problem of the Japan-America relationship. And then people begin to excavate like genealogical investigation of the politics of the Cold War. And that kind of, I think, awareness of the history having its dark side or unconscious side, and was really widely shared after the 3/11, and people begin to dig up some of the materials. And I think that also this kind of investigative mind, I think, also contributed much to the re-examination of the war memories or the legacy of the war and whatnot. And also another political reason that I can think of is the after bubble economy, bursted in the early 90s, and Japanese economical situation is this constant downturn. And then the political status of Japan in the Asian countries is constantly weakening, in contrast to Korea or China and whatnot. So, so in that environment, it is no longer possible to ignore the voices from other Asian countries in general in the society. So, I mean, maybe there are other issues or elements behind this general trend, but I think those are the elements which contribute to the new awareness of the historical past, the war memories in Japan now.
Yeah, you mentioned the other Asian countries, or probably I could expand it and say non-Japanese artists, but what was the reaction if non-Japanese artists exhibited in Japan controversial issues? Because, for example, the statue of the comfort women is by Korean artists. So I can understand that Korean artists will be on a special position in Japan. But have you had any experience with, I don't know, American or European artists displaying critical works towards Japan, not just, you know, nostalgic or essentialist aspects of Japanese culture?
Not that I can think of.
Yeah.
But I don't, this is a pure speculation, but I think in general, Japanese audience or people are still, I think, still carrying this complex against the Western countries in a way. So, and then, for example, if you think about those right-wingers who protested against this after freedom of expression section, if American artists, for example, presented a work like that, I think their protests, I mean, certainly there will be some protests, but the protests would not be as severe as, you know, against Korean artists. And I can imagine that. Yeah. That would be the case. Yeah.
Which brings me to the other side. Are you aware of artists working in other disciplines like theater, cinema, music, probably, that face this kind of criticism, this kind of severe reaction from political sides towards their projects? Was there anything similar to that?
The easy example that I can think of is the recent documentary called Shusenjo by Miki Dezaki. Miki, in fact, is I know him pretty well because he studied with us. That documentary film was actually created as a part of the MA thesis in the program that I work. So I knew him as a student for a long time, but you know, Miki's Shusenjo was severely criticized in Japan, and there are a couple of incidents when theaters were attacked by these right-wingers, and then they decided to cancel the screening of the film. And so therefore, I mean, he had no choice but to go outside Japan and do a tour of this screening in Europe and also in the States. And he did, yes. I don't know how many screenings he did. He had quite many screenings in all over the world of that film. But in Japan, it's it is a very touchy issue, and he was severely criticized. And in fact, these right-wing groups, they actually started sending some scathing accusations to all the professors in Sophia University, for example. And oh yeah. And I received a couple of threatening.
You did?
Oh, I did. And so did my colleagues in Sophia. Okay. And they're quite organized. These right-wing factions and organizations. And I remember that, the 2018 when we had a symposium there in Tel Aviv, and then the government sent, 2 right-wing scholars to the symposium.
Were they sent by the government? I don't know. They were sent by right-wing organizations.
I think Nihon Kaigi, was
Nihon Kaigi is a government organization?
No, it's not officially speaking, but they had a close connection to all these politicians in LDP, basically.
Yeah, for those of you who are not aware, we had a conference in 2018 celebrating the 150th anniversary for the Meiji restoration, which is the moment of starting of Japanese modernization. And we had hundreds of professors participating, and all of a sudden we realized we had 2 representatives coming from the extreme right wing, and they were trying to crush panels and express extreme views. And we had some very brave professors standing up and answering and debating with them and bringing the historical facts. And that was very shaky and very interesting at the same time. And Professor Hayashi was with us at that event, which was, it had a huge echo after that in many places. Yes.
But you know that those two professors actually were recommended by the embassy.
Yes,
right?
correct.
So, yeah.
But by a special person in the embassy who is related to Makuya. I'm not sure if you know what Makuya is, but Makuya is a Japanese new religion which is associated with Judaism. And in Israel, they're very famous because they used to send their members to Israel for education or stay here for for longer periods. Many of them in kibbutzim, in socialist villages. And they established a name in Israel. A lot of people know of them, although in Japan, nobody knows who Makuya are. And interestingly, that person in the embassy is a Makuya member, and Makuya is associated with radical right-wing policies within Japan, Yamato Damashi, etc. So it's a kind of a strange combo in this ideology, and that was what nourished these two scholars to come here. So yeah, it's an odd situation. Yeah. Shall we take some questions from the audience? I see there are several questions here. We'll take them by the order. So Irit Ben Moshe is asking you, will it be possible for the mayor to organize a help desk to serve the protesters, protecting in the same time the freedom of the art?
Maybe he means governor, not the mayor.
Oh, the governor, okay. Because you say the governor was
the governor was
and the mayor was against the exhibition.
The mayor was against. The governor was actually used to be a lawyer, and then he knows the value of freedom of expression for democracy. And then so it's interesting that this Governor Omura really harshly criticized Kawamura in the public press conference, and they were feuding with each other during the Aichi Triennale time. And well, help desk to serve the help desk is well, the Triennale already had an idea of creating a kind of section to receive these protesters' phone calls and whatnot. That they had some plan, but simply the quantity of the calls and then also the space in which they threatened these organizations was just beyond expectation. And so that's why they had to shut down the event immediately in order to protect the people walking there and also the safety of the visitors. But of course, I mean, seen from a perspective of the After Freedom of Expression section, I mean, this could be interpreted as a censorship, so that's why I'm saying that it is a very difficult issue that, where to strike a good balance between public safety and freedom of expression. Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that. Mr. Zev Lipan is saying to Professor Hayashi, thank you for your candid and thorough presentation of the conflict. Yoshiko Shimada is here with us. Hi, Yoshiko. I must point out that the Freedom of Expression artists did not collaborate with the curatorial team of the After Freedom of Expression. The curatorial team applied for a temporary measure, and I think it put a pressure to reopen.
It did. I actually heard from members of the Freedom IG, and I did not have a direct contact with the curators of the After Freedom of Expression section, but I heard that this Kari Shogun, the temporary measure, which was actually denied by the court, but that really put a great pressure on the organizing, committee, Omura, and but at the same time they were in a kind of stalemate, So I think what Freedom IT people did was, and also the boycotted artists also did. I mean, they actually put a deadline for the reopening, the negotiation. They actually, the Fuji and Koizumi maintained the contact with the curators of the Freedom, the After Freedom of Expression section, and also they maintain a contact with the Omura and Tsuda. So and Tanaka Koki also came in at the last minute in October 5th and 6th. I remember that they were going through an intense negotiation on that particular day. And because I remember it because I moderated the international symposium on that day. And if you look at the YouTube, coverage of that international symposium, you notice that the stage is half empty because the symposium was supposed to start at 10 or something like that. But in that particular morning, this new situation came up. The half of the artists who were supposed to be on stage were actually still negotiating in the backstage with the prefectural government, and also they maintained contact with the curators of the closed section. So this Karishoma thing has added pressure on it, but they also, on that day, the Fuji and some boycotted artists set the deadline for the reopening. They said if the prefectural government and the curators of freedom of expression, if they don't start talking to each other and discussing, try to find a way to reopen that section, they are going to, they're not going to reopen their own sections, the boycotted artists. So, the end point of Aichi Triennale was October 5th, 14th, right? So this negotiation was going on October 5th and 6th. So the October 8th was the reopening day. So those are the crucial 2-3 days. They were setting the deadline, whether they you guys don't strike a deal, we're going to just completely out of the Aichi Triennale so that, the Aichi Triennale will not go back to the original, state. And so it's a very complicated negotiation. It's like a party negotiations are going on. The situations were changing like minute by minute. And so I had to run the symposium without half of the artists for about an hour. And then only after 1.5 hours, they actually came on stage and joined the discussion. So it was really, interesting but difficult situation that I witnessed.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from Diana Young. Thank you for the wonderful talk. How did the Japanese general public react to the sudden closure of the section in the midst of the Triennale? Were participating artists able to convey their ideas and freedom of expression to the public by picking up nationalist phone calls and so on? Thank you.
You mean to the general public? You mean, yes, I mean, there's this freedom of Aichi, people are the ones who are very active in opening a discussion for general public. Like I said, in the sanatorium, for example, it was open to anybody. And I saw many citizens actually participating in the discussion there. And then we studied the concept of freedom of expression, inviting professionals like scholars of constitution and whatnot. And so, yes, there was a constant discussion and discourse about freedom of expression, about that. And then also, I didn't mention this in my presentation, but during the closure time, many organizations, including, for example, Association of Art Critics, for which I am a member, issued public statements about freedom of expression. And not only us, but also other organizations, they issued Pen Club also, they issued statements about freedom of expression in support of the after freedom of expression section. So yes, I mean, the concept of freedom of expression was really floating around, and then people were, I think for many of the general public, this was the first time that they seriously thought about the concept and what is the implication of that for democracy. Right.
Okay, so I'm just going down to another question by Sehim Park. Thank you, Professor Hayashi, for your thought-provoking lecture. Could you explain a little more about the role of the Aichi Triennale in the understanding of the statue of peace, Comfort Women, as indeed the Triennale incident change strengthen decrease the prior understanding of the statue in Japan? And how was the position of the statue changed in Japanese understanding?
That I have to really consult with the research. I don't know really. I mean, I was really shocked by the survey that I mentioned earlier. I mean, I think the several newspapers did a survey about the closure of that section. I think more than 40% people said yes and approved the, the section, and in many, if you look at the Twitters and all the social medias and people talking about the politics is different from art and all the things, it's very naive comments all over. And so I cannot really talk about the general trend or general tendency of how people, understood the situation, how some of the people's views were transformed through the incident or not. I hope it had some positive impact on people's understanding of the comfort woman issue. And I'm pretty sure some of them, started learning about the history of comfort women because of that incident. But also the same, also similar number of people really hardened their view against the comfort woman issue. So it's very difficult to summarize. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. I mean, it's a very vague answer. But, yeah.
Okay, Midori Yoshimoto is with us, and she says, "Hi, Ayelet and Hayashi-san. Thank you so much for organizing a wonderful occasion to review this complex series of events. Reiko Tomi and I co-chaired the discussion session about this in New York in September last year. During the discussion, one of the main points that came up was the need for international coalition of artists and art professionals to share their experience with art censorship and how to counter it in the future. Do you think developing such international coalitions would be possible and useful?"
Of course. And that's actually part of the reason why they wrote up this IG protocol. And then it's interesting that, this time, whenever they came up this protest or statements, they actually issued, those statements both in Japanese and English, sometimes in Korean too. So they were very much aware of the international relationship. And in fact, in the 40, artists who signed, endorsed the IT, We Freedom IT group, I mean, they included international artists, like especially the artists from South America or Mesoamerica. So from the beginning, they maintained this international relationship. In fact, they did multiple meetings, informal meetings, inviting Tania Bruguera and Pedro Reyes and all those people. So I think that really strengthened their activities from the beginning. And then I think it is possible and it is necessary or desirable to keep that kind of relationship across the national borders and share the information, the experience with artists of other countries. So that's why, for example, IG Protocol is on their homepage in English. I mean, so that everybody can. In fact, the idea of protocol first came from Pedro Reyes, the curator, who supported the boycott of the artists. And he's the one who suggested maybe as a result of positive result, we can actually issue or propose out of this experience was to write up a protocol for future incidents, similar incidents like that. So that was the beginning of this whole idea of declaration and protocol. And that's, at a certain point, I was invited as an observer and then just became a regular participant of the discussion. And so, yeah, it's international sort of scope or perspective was really an integral part of the whole, activity.
Yeah, I think definitely in this time and age, a lot of artists in many countries and venues do face the questions of political intervention, and that could be something very. Thank you, Midori, for raising this issue. It's very important. Akiko Whaley, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I was wondering if you could speak a little more about the change in public reaction after the reopening. Did the strategies taken, parentheses, small group viewing, post viewing, discussion, etc., and close parentheses, help change anything?
I hope so. Well, well, again, I mean, it's very difficult to summarize the general trend, but at the same time, I have to emphasize that, for example, this Kinchome projects of Clothespin and Your Freedom thing, the post-its, I mean, that really gave a very good opportunity for any visitor to voice their opinions and leaving the messages on the door. And that was really an encouraging thing to look at. Every time I went back, and post-its were just spilling over the frame and to the wall and whatnot. And so the public, because they were given this opportunity to freely express their opinions, they became more vocal. They became more active in supporting that kind of move. But at the same time, on the other hand, you have people, the right-wingers, who are daily coming to the exhibition site and on the street, and they were always sort of making some speech using the speakers and all those things. And so it's like an intensification in both sides, during the closure. Yeah, I think, but the strategies taken by those artists, the group discussions and all those things, has really encouraged so many people to voice their opinions. They became active participants in the process of supporting the reopening of that section. Yeah. Oh, you muted, Ayelet. You're muted.
I said, somebody's making noise in the background. I said, we still have 4 more questions. I hope it's okay with you. One of them is a bit longish. Yeah, so I'll carry on. Professor Hayashi, when regarding the topic presented in your presentation, reflection on the Aichi Triennale incident, in view of the general topic of the lecture series, art, protest, and democracy, it seems to me that there are basically 2 main issues in debate here. A, the conflict itself, B, the whole incident of protest and its outcome, as well as the process of its development. While you, Professor Hayashi, focuses mainly on the incident of protest and its outcome, I remained curious to the issue, A, the conflict itself, as to why it started, as an old wise Asian Orient phrases go, better to not going into a problem than attempting solving the problem after one is immersed into it, end quote. And in view of that, I wonder who and why was the curator and artistic director, Tsuda-san, chosen? Who chose him? And if after his choice, was he supposed to give his concept and agenda to the Triennale, where this probable conflict that someone was predicted to some extent was clearly presented and perhaps might have been discussed in advance for the possible controversy and provocation?
Well, starting with who chose Tsuda-san for that, I mean, there was a sort of the committee under the prefectural government who includes members of the former directors, for example, of the Aichi Triennale and other specialists in art world. And they are the ones who discuss and choose the new director for each Aichi Triennale. And this time, I think they chose Tsuda-san, I think because Tsuda was really active, vocal in the field of social media, and was active in talking about art exhibitions and whatnot. So I think Tsuda-san was chosen by this committee to make this Triennale very challenging, and they wanted to introduce some new air to the art world, because you know, it was a really conscious choice of choosing an outsider to be the director. Outsider meaning the outside, not an art specialist, to be the director of the whole Triennale. And it turned out to sort of backfire at them in a way. But Tsuda was a very ambitious journalist, and then he, I think he had this plan from early stage, and he saw the 2015 version of this, you know, After Freedom of Expression exhibition in Tokyo, and he was very much impressed by the audacious, you know, plan that this curators actually did there, and then he wanted to introduce everything in the Aichi Triennale. So, yeah, so that, and then what's interesting is that after this, you know, scandal, not scandal, but conflict or the incident happened, and the Aichi prefecture organized a review committee to review the situation, right? And then they first asked one of the sort of committee members who chose Tsuda-san to be part of this review committee, but of course, I mean, that's creates a conflict of interest. So he refused, he declined to become a member of that. So that this review committee consisted of completely third-party members after the result. So, I don't know. I mean, if I answered your question clearly or not, but Tsuda-san was chosen to be a provocateur, sort of, you know, a person and director for that. And then they predicted the responses, as I said in my presentation, and Tsuda-san was aware of the possibility of right-wingers coming to the exhibition and make noises. But the noises were far greater than they expected. So it's just a matter of, quantity and loudness of the protest. I mean, in a way, you could criticize, at a hindsight, you could criticize them for not prepared enough for the protest. And so, yeah. But also you have to take into account that, you know, just 2 weeks before the opening, there was this Kyoto animation incident in which 30 some people died of the actual, you know, terror attack. You know, somebody put a fire on this Kyoto animation building and 30 some people died. And it was really a shocking event collectively.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I spoke to Nakamura Fumiko in the Aichi Prefecture Museum, and she said they were horrified by the possibility of having an arson, and they were really, really cautious about the possibility of putting a bomb or fires, and the decision to close was completely based on security reasons.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is by Shelley Leibovich Kalaora, who says, thanks for the interesting presentation. Does the governmental intervention limited to projects that are financed by the nation? Meaning, was the exhibition financed specifically, or is it possible on private projects not to be intervened?
Yeah, this is a good question. You know, indirect censorships were happening everywhere in Japan, I have to say. For example, one of the works which was included in this After Freedom of Expression section was just a simple haiku produced for, you know, addressing this, you know, Article 9 of our Constitution, Kyujo, which is, you know,
the pacifism of Japan, yes.
Right. And so this haiku group wanted to exhibit those haikus in, I think, renting a space from some local government, a city or prefecture, I forgot. It's a public space, right? Publicly run space. And they, after learning that this haiku is included in that exhibition, they refused to rent a space. You know, so they canceled the rent agreement of the event. So, you know, those censorships were happening in that kind of way. It's not politicians coming to the exhibition site and then just you know, taking the work out of the exhibition. From the beginning, it's not really government. It's just a prefectural government or mayoral offices and all those public sectors. They all are very worried about supporting the expressions which deal with issues of comfort women or criticizing the Japanese government or yes, whatever the touchy political issues. I mean, you know, when they find an artwork or some literature or something like that which deals with, which touches on these issues, they tend to be really reluctant to
self-censorship.
Yeah, self-censorship. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, but you mentioned before that the Freedom of Expression exhibition was exhibited in Tokyo 2015 on a private venue, right? So that made a difference, obviously, but it wasn't announced. Nobody knew about the exhibition when it was in a private venue. So that's the dark side of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is from Sydney Tang. And he says, hi, Professor Hayashi, thank you for the great presentation as always. Do you think it will be possible to hold similar natured exhibition to After Freedom of Expression in Japan, given the new trend of political artists in Japan, or are institutions apprehensive to have a repeat of this case? It's similar to the question we just had.
Hi, Sydney. I hope you're doing well. It's, of course, I think it is very difficult for a public institute now in Japan to do a similar.
Very daring.
Yeah. I mean, there was another incident after Aichi Triennale. There was a Hiroshima Triennale.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, in which they were planning to exhibit the whole series of Oura's prints. But the Hiroshima city backed off from the sponsorship, and then and then artists and curators protested against it, and the whole Hiroshima Triennale just evaporated in midair. And
Koizumi was coming with some drawings of the emperor, which he erased the face, and that was another,
And then artists like Koizumi and Chimpom, they have so many works that they will never be able to show in Japan. You know, so Koizumi has certain works which he showed in outside Japan, but he told me that he will never be able to show them in Japan because it deals with the image of the Emperor Hirohito and whatnot. So yes, sorry, the answer has to be really pessimistic, or yeah, but situation is not.
So here we are outside Japan to extend our hand and help with these issues. Hi, Patricia Lenz. Patricia is in Zurich and she's working for her PhD on war memory in Japanese art. It's not really a question, she says. It seems to me that to create a collective and make room for discussions was a very effective response by the contributing artist and the arts in general to the nationalist activism against the exhibition. It is kind of like a counter mobilization.
It was a very effective response. Yeah, I mean, I really admire this, freedom Aichi artists to keep the venues open for any discussions, and then they invite. Well, but you know, I had some doubts and questions about, for example, when they invited Mayor Kawamura for dialogue, it's a very touchy question, and you know, it's very important to keep an open dialogue in the democratic system that we live in, right? For anybody has a right for freedom of expression, even the right-wingers, nationalists. But at the same time, you know, inviting a nationalist, a right-winger, for a public forum discussion, actually giving them the opportunity to promote their views to public using their media. So, you know, it has this kind of, the merits and demerits at the same time. And sometimes I really wonder whether that sort of ideology of openness is really a good thing all the time or not, you know?
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, and the very last comment is coming again from Midori Yoshimoto, and she says, this is not a question, but I put it here because chat is disabled. The link to protocol was not that easy to find because the current IT Triennale site has moved on to advertise the next one in 2022. Just in case, for your information, I think this site needs to be more easily locatable. I will distribute that later on. So yes, and you know, they chose Kataoka Mami, who is a curator at Mori. She's a very agreeable curator. She's doing fine art properly, no political aspects there. So, you know, they changed their skin and they're going in the straight mainstream in a way, being very cautious after the events of 2019, I guess.
But you know that Mori is planning a retrospective of Chimpong.
Oh!
Yeah. And so
Mami is curating?
I'm not sure, but Mami is involved, yes. And
is
so
involved. Yeah, of course.
I'm
She's the
curious
chief.
what kind of show that they're going to put there. Yeah.
Oh my God, that would be interesting. Okay, thank you so much, Professor Hayashi. And I see that Eran is back with us.
Yeah, well, thank you everybody for great questions. I mean, thank you so much. And Ayelet, again, thank you so much. A wonderful conversation.
Oh, you're most welcome. This is our pleasure and our really eye-opening.
Frozen.
So many aspects of the life, you know. I mean, in Japan and Israel alike, we're facing our problems here, which are in so many ways similar and echoing the situation in Japan. So your talk and your insights were like highlight for us. Thank you.
Yes, let me join Ayelet with thanking you. I think it was really illuminating to hear in the past almost 2 hours, also responding for the questions, which were excellent. Because as you said, you know, the issue of freedom of expression is not, it still has to be fought for. It's not that obvious, even, you know, it's almost 2021 and it's not obvious globally. And Aichi Triennale, I think, has global ramification that as one of the questions insinuated, we have to think globally in this respect and protect, you know, and collaborate and protect each other. So I personally want to thank you for taking the time and joining us, because as Ayelet also mentioned in her introduction, but also in part of the questions, you know, this has some, you know, it also reflects to some issues that are happening, not that overtly in Israel, but covertly within the artistic and curatorial and museum scenes also here in Israel. So thank you very much for your time. And it was a real pleasure. And I hope to see you here face to face when time allows.
In the near future.
Oh yeah. So, yeah. Thank you for giving
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for all the participants around the world who joined us. Morning in America, midday and late night in Japan. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.